All right, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started this evening. Just going to do a quick sound check. If you cannot hear me at the moment, just send me a message. Audio looks fine on my end, but just in case the audio is not coming through, I hope it sounds. Does it sound okay? Is it too loud? Is it decent? Um, Too sensitive? I got a new microphone, and I'm just curious. Cool. Good. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Today will be a continuation of the DOM and manipulating the DOM that we started in our last week. I'm going to continue to use the editor of choice. I know we had tried a little bit with REPL and CodePen, and just to kind of jump right into tools that we'll be using day to day as developers. I'm going to continue with using VSC. However, you can feel free to use an editor of your choice, or what you are most comfortable with. I'll also show a couple, tips and tricks and things with getting set up for projects and things like that. As always, if you have any questions, I will be keeping an eye and taking breaks here and there to look at the chat on YouTube, Slack every so often, but I'll probably see the message on YouTube first. And again, we'll proceed as follows. So, all right. So what we'll do is we'll start afresh, and I'm going to go ahead and create a starter project again, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can see our changes, where to look for them, and how we could sort of visually test um, aspects of what we're doing with our JavaScript tonight, which will hopefully be some of the properties that will allow us to pretty much manipulate the DOM by doing such things as adding content, modifying content, deleting content, and working in general with HTML and CSS through the lens and approach of JavaScript. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that. Now, I'm just going to set up very quickly. I made a new directory, and in that directory, I just placed three basic files: my index, HTML, JS, and CSS. And I'm going to use the Emmet abbreviation in VSC just to pull up a very standard HTML5 template. If you and this is Emmet, it can be used across all browsers. I recommend checking it out if you aren't already using it. But lots of goodness with Emmet, time saving. And one thing is that if you do exclamation point tab, you can then get a HTML5 template that is a good starting template to work off of. So we'll pull that up now, and then I'm going to go ahead and just tab over and change a couple of these quick. And we'll just make this WW3, now weekly 3. And that will be for this week. And then two things I definitely want to do right. In order to communicate with my CSS, I should probably pull that in, and I'll do that in the head as such, and we'll reference to the index.css. Oops. All right, cool. I don't know. There we go. There we go. Okay. Third time's the charm. And you'll see people you can do for these tags that are self-closing. You can in HTML technically you can do both, but once you start to get into React in JSX, it's going to be something that you're going to want to do and get used to. So granted, I don't have to necessarily do this right now, but you can go through and close off these tags. And usually the self-close, I don't touch these two, but any sort of meta you can. But if you don't have that, that's fine. That won't be an issue for HTML at all, what we're doing here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pull in the style sheet, and then we'll do our script again as usual, and we'll pull that in through the right below the close of the body tag. And cool. Oops. Must have turned, yeah, I think I turned off the enter character on commit, my bad. So we'll script into the index.js, and we have a starter HTML file. Now, I'll go ahead and just put one element on. And the reason I do this is because you'll see this is going to be a common trend for working with JS to manipulate the DOM is you're going to see one element that is going to be like a root or an app or some sort of anchor or hook into the DOM, the HTML template. And it's funny because looking back on years of web design, um, it really has shifted to looking at the source code and saying, well, okay, where's all the HTML? So you usually see one HTML tag, and the rest of the page is generated through the JavaScript, which is really really interesting. It's led to some amazing abilities and some hardships, but just like everything, pros and cons. But it's cool that that we have that capability to generate those sort of views so readily and on the fly, and that does add to the uniqueness and interactivity of the modern web. So that gets us set up. I'll do a save there, and I'm going to use a tool for our server today, which is just a VSC extension called Live Server. What this does is it will spin up a local web server for us to use. And the best part about it is that it is reloading, hot loading, auto reloading, what have you. So if I were to make a change, let's say to check if my CSS is connected, I'm just going to come in and let's say we take the body and just do something obviously to see if it's connected, and we make it black, right? So there, that reloads automatically, and now I can kind of attest that my CSS is connected properly. I can throw in another thing quick and just see if I'm rendering HTML properly. So I can do in this route, if I wanted to do a quick hi, okay, that's good. I'll delete that out for now because my goal is to see if my JavaScript now is hooked up. So a couple ways you can do this, right, depending on what our goal is. And now I guess I'll use it to kind of introduce, a DOM method, and then we'll see if we can hook in. So if I were to just put this up very quickly as a side by side down here, up by down, what I want to look at with this is just say, okay, when I start with a project like this, I close up all these little things because I want to get a sense of like the main structure, right? So, okay, my head, that's fine. I won't be working with that now, but the body, right? So I get a good sense of kind of my parent tags in the body, and my goal is I'm going to want to select that root and then create some content or a node to put some content in, and go from there. So then that way we can at least access the DOM through our script and then modify it. So my first goal is going to be to access the root ID, and then let's go ahead and create a h1 component. So create or an element, an h1 element. And we want that h1 element to say then give h1 element some text content of welcome. Okay, so this will kind of recap a little bit what we did last week and then set us up for the looking at what we're going to do tonight. Okay. In projects that you'll encounter, you're going to be using a lot of manipulations to access various aspects of the DOM and different tags, and we'll take a look at that as well. I won't replicate the project, but we'll definitely look at similarities and authentic, some real world projects too that may help as well. Okay, cool. So we have our pseudocode, right? Let's go ahead and see if we can go ahead and accomplish each one of these. So accessing the root ID, in this case, you could go a couple different ways, right? With our ID, right, we can access that through two ways, right? Two ways that come to mind. And one of the ways I would use, because something like get element by ID, right? That's one of those that it's not hard to work with because since there's only one ID, you're not going to run into an issue of getting a node list or something like even with one, like the class names, the one where you get by class names. Even if you have one class, you're going to get a node list and you're going to have to deal with that. Not a bad thing per se, but just again, you always try to less steps to the same goal is usually better when you have a lot of stepping to do, right? In your daily jobs, or it's not being complacent; it's being efficient, right? Because you already have a lot to do on top of it, so um, might as well, if you could do something just as the same goal in one step that you could do two, that's great, and it's a matter of really preference and really what your boss and team would like at the end of the day. So we can use that, right? And then, of course, we always have our go-to for the DOM, right? Our query selector that we can use, which is nice because even if I were to deal with a class or something that would return a DOM list per se or node list, this, if I'm selecting one, won't. I'll be able to select individually, that item. But the only issue with this is remember that whenever I use query selector, this is based off of the CSS selector. So this would need something that would be understood by CSS. So if it's a class, I have to use the period. If it's a ID, in this case, I would have to use the um, in this case, I guess hash pound symbol, whatever you want to go. The octo, there's a octothorpe or something. But anyway, I digress. That the symbol, the number, pound, hash, what have you. Its fancy name escapes me at the minute. But anyway, so we'll go ahead and we can use one of those methods. So that'll help with the accessing of the root ID. So we have that pseudocode planned out. Let's go ahead and grab that. So I'm going to do so, and I'm going to set this equal to a constant, right? Because I will want to use this later. So I'll grab that constant by the root. So we'll say, okay, in this case, we'll say root, right? Just to give it something that we can recognize. So constant root is equal to um, document dot get element by ID, and then we will ID, and then we'll grab it by the root. And here we will not use the um, pound symbol or hash symbol because it already knows we're giving it an element by ID. And since you can only have one unique ID, it would be element and not elements. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to pull open the DevTools and look in our console. So we'll pull open the console, and you can do that through the command Alt-I, Control Alt-I on Windows and Linux. And you can also always go up here and go right into the console there. This will take you to DevTools, but it just specifically will open this pane. Versus the last one you had. That's the only difference. But either way, if you use the I or J, you can get there. You just have to click the console. So what I want to do is we're going to use a technique called, well, a method on the console called log. And this is a really good way to check values at times in JavaScript. So let me see if I can get the root to log out. Okay, so what I did is I'm going to log to the console this variable to see what value I get after it. And hey, it looks pretty good, right? So we were expecting to end up with the element or reference to the div ID root, and we have it. So this variable now represents that um, element, that part of the DOM. Okay. Now we're going to make an H1 element, right? So we can do this by saying, all right, constant H1 is equal to our document, which is our main DOM that all these methods are on. And we're going to create an element, which is one of the most common ways to do. There are other ones, but this is the biggie for making these sort of things. And we need to give it a tag name. I like VSC. VSC has a nice IntelliSense that you can use, as do other editors. It's nice for quick things. Don't be ashamed to look things up, reference things at all at any point. So in this case, we do take a tag name on that. So we'll feed it an H1. And I get in the habit of just logging as I go, just because I want to see if I'm getting what I return. And later on, it helps with debugging. So if I could rule out errors along the way, then when I get to an error down the road, I can kind of narrow the focus of that and scope of that error. So it looks like we're doing good. The only thing is with console logs, when you're done with them, you want to clean them out. Okay. And now let's go ahead and add on the next portion. So we have the H1 element. And in this case, we want to go ahead and give it some text. So we can grab that. And our element now is H1. This one we won't store as a variable per se yet. It's more so I'm going to call a method on sort of H1 element. But before I do that, I missed something, right? So we'll go through and let me add it and see what happens first. So I have my H1 element, right? And you can use a couple options: inner text, inner text context or content. It depends on inner text is really iffy. It has a bad name. Not per se, but I mean, there's some security issues that could occur in inner HTML. Inner text, not so much, but inner HTML is the one that's a little iffy because that can be used to load in scripts and stuff and just lead to some browser-based attacks and stuff like that. But anyway, um, in this case, as we're learning, we can use it, but I'll use text content. And with text content, we want to go ahead and set that equal to something. So we'll just say welcome. We'll save that. And I'm going to go ahead and investigate my DOM over here. And it looks like I have a div ID of the root. So, I mean, I log these to the console, right? And they seem to work out. So the issue is, well, I never really connected in the rest of the stuff I made, right? So I got the root. I ended up making an H1. I added some stuff to it, but I never really connected it to the DOM. So at this point, after I created that H1 element, I probably should have linked it up and appended it to the root. So in this case, I can then take my parent and say, okay, root, go ahead and append child, and go ahead and append that H1 element that I made. And now it comes to life on the DOM. So notice too, as I kind of went through that, like debugging, I knew where I stood, I knew my values existed. So I was able to narrow the scope, right? Because without console logging, I wouldn't be able to visually see the elements I created and modified. And it could have gone down a bad road, right? Because as humans, we tend to think the worst. And if you can kind of narrow down as you go, you end up narrowing that scope of where that error can be. Okay. So, in that case, now we've added to the DOM, right? So, we can access it, we can add to it, and there are a whole slew of methods that we can use to um, do this kind of work. Okay. So, um, with that said, that kind of introduces what I would be looking to kind of bridge the gap from last week, and just take a quick minute to see if there are any questions on the chat on the channel, YouTube channel, and if not, we'll continue by getting into some more options and methods that you can use um, in these projects. Okay, cool. All right, so um, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple different ways that we can maybe use these sort of most common and most helpful um, kinds of techniques. Okay, and give me one sec. I just want to pull something up. Okay, cool. And 1 minute. Okay. So I'm going to borrow, and I have this object here really quickly. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull this off of a GitHub that I use. So let me go ahead and clone down this quickly, just so I have access to it. And I just want to pull off something really quick from this. So I'm going to go back into my folder and get ready and copy this over. So let's see here, pull this out and cool. So, all right, awesome. There's an index.js file I want to reference. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at this object and let me copy it over and I'll explain the structure and how we're going to use it and how this is kind of going to relate. So copy this over and we'll make ourselves a new file here and I'm going to call this will be kind of like my data in a sense. You want to call it like a dummy data or just it's gonna let's just pretend it's gonna represent data coming in from like an API or a third party, something like that. So we'll call it data.js. And I'm just going to paste this in. And we'll take a look at the structure of the data and what we're going to do with it in the course of the rest of the hour. So what you see here is essentially a JavaScript object. And as you learn these, objects essentially are literal. The object literal is indicated by a pair of braces. And essentially what they represent are almost, you'll hear them called dictionaries in other languages. They are key value pairs. So there is a key, which is something that is going to refer to a value. So just like the dictionary is the best example here, you have a word that you look up, and when you look up that word, you get a definition, and you could reference that definition through that word. The same thing applies here. So what you're looking at is essentially um, keys that represent various parts of a website on the DOM. So we have a nav for a navigation bar. We have a call to action, which is something that involves like a button or getting a user to interact with it to collect, info or, give them more information, what have you. Main content, which would be semantically in something like a main tag for the main part of the page, some contact information, and a footer. And as you notice, and I copied that twice, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Whoops. So let me get rid of that. We don't need it. We only need one. And for the data, um, essentially, then you could see that objects can contain other objects, right? So here, this contact key, its value isn't just a string or another key and value, but it's actually an object of more values. So this is all the contact information. And if I reference the contact information, I could reference each one of these as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can access those and stuff like that. So this is pretty cool. We're going to take essentially all of this information in an object, and which is a data structure you will use over probably one of the most common ones you'll use all the time in any language really, but we'll use them many, many times in JavaScript. And we're going to try and lay out the DOM by using this data or pieces of right. So ideally in the hour, I'd love to get through all this, but we'll take and we'll get as far as we can, showing some cool different examples of each type, right? So we're going to need a corresponding HTML. So I'm going to modify mine a little bit, and I do have the example that I'm going to use. So I will copy that over too. And this is going to give me essentially all of the, selectors and stuff like that. I mean, we could go through and plan it out and actually make our own semantic structure from that. But in the avenue of time, I did it and we'll use that. So I'll pull that up and we'll copy that over. And our goal eventually, in a sec, I'll show you. is to get something that looks somewhat like this. Let me copy this over into my index AV. I'll save that, right? And then we'll take a look on the server what that came out to be. Okay, so now we don't have anything there, right? It's devoid. Our goal is to take that content and get something that looks like this, so to speak. Okay. So right now we essentially have just, a title. We have a couple little things like some text, right? Alt text because images aren't loading. So essentially, basically, what we're dealing with now is just the HTML semantics, and we need to kind of add content to it, fill content, and modify. Right. So this at least gives us our tags. It gives us some classes to work with, and we can use that. And the goal is not to go through and modify the HTML in this case, but we're going to modify using just JavaScript. Okay, so this will be a good way to kind of look at some examples of kind of the DOM manipulation that you can do. Cool. So let's do that. Let me see if these errors. Index has text. Oh, yeah, let me make sure my style sheet. Yep, I changed my style sheet there. I'm importing that. Should still be that. That should take that error away. And 404 not found. I probably have to just change the import down here so that we can. Yeah, we need to put my index.js back in. So script src equals index.js. Boom. And that should take that away. And now, yeah, it's giving me my errors in my JavaScript because now those things don't exist now, those properties, since we changed it. So let me just see where this error is coming. Yeah, where is that index.js? Yeah, that's another way you can do the script tag, but we don't have to worry about that now. Okay, cool. And if I go in and change my JS, and we'll get rid of the comment that all out. Cool. Now we're at a nice clean slate, and I'll take the CSS off to be okay, cool. So let's go ahead and take a look. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pull up my HTML so I can work off of it. I'll close up all my tags, and the first thing I do is I get a sense of what's going on in the body, and see what leveling I have, right? So as soon as I close this up, I see there's that container, right? So this is like that div root that we're going to hook into. Okay. So this is kind of where it all sort of begins as the main parent. And then as I break it down, you could see we have, well, five major siblings: the header, the section, a section with main content, and a contact section and a footer. So in our data, this kind of, in theory, represents, and we'll make this a bit bigger for now. This represents essentially now those sections. So in my header, there's my nav, right? And my CTA section, my main content, my contact, and my footer. So these, notice, do you see the structure here actually? How what you're looking at is really the DOM and the markup, right? So this is the object or the document object, right? The model of the document object. And it looks like this. And the only difference is now when this gets translated into HTML, it corresponds to these major markup semantics, right? So this is just another way of here's my website, right? Visually and now in code. And here's two ways I do it. I either organize this as an object or I lay out the markup. Okay, so these two are really the same thing. Just we have to kind of translate this now over into the other one. So we'll do exactly kind of what the DOM does. And when you learn with, or what is done with the DOM, and when you learn React, React is going to give you a way to abstract all this even further. And it gets really cool, but it all starts here. So the only thing is now this data, I'm going to have to get this in here, right? So we can, there are two ways that we can do it, so that I have access, because right now, since these are separate files, I'm not going to be able to pull any data here. So there's an easy way, probably in a way that you won't learn for a little bit, but um, I will just do the easy way. What we'll do is I'm going to copy it and put it in my index.js. And later on, if interested, I'll show you how you can import, because I don't know the way of this setup now. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to use an import and export statement simply. I'd probably have to do something like this. And I'm curious to test and I'll explain what it is. I see if it works. So that was called site content. This should export this, and then I should be able to do something like this. Constant site content is equal to require, and then data is where that is found. And if I save that, my site content, yeah, see now I was able to, instead of copying it over, this is just a quick way to import it over. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about that now. This is just me saving time copying and pasting it, but it basically makes now this whole object available for me. So if I were to do something like this, like let's see the value here in the console, we can check. Let's console log. So if I console log, and in this case, I want to console log my site content. And let me require, oh, see, yeah, okay. I, it is, see, that's funny. It would, it does pull up there, but the way it works with the DOM, it's not going to do it. So I probably have to install Node is really the case there. That's the thing. And um, if that's the case, then yeah, no, I won't belabor it. But just because I'm halfway there, you don't have to worry about this part, but this is just for me to, for the sake of brevity here, to see if that would do the trick. Yeah, no, that's fine. So I'd have to probably go through and set up Babel and all that. So I'll just copy. Oh well, just because we'll get to that later with the back end kind of stuff. But I tried, right? So normally that would work. We are just using a very low, not low, low in the terms of I need more scripts for that. I need a backend. So yeah, and we don't need to be about that right now. We can be, and I will gladly if anybody wants to chit chat about it. But for now, we'll just do this, and then that way we'll just make it easy. So now I just have access to everything here. So now if I do, I get rid of that part. If I console.log site content, we should be a bit better off now. Maybe if I spelled it correctly. And there we go. So now we get what we want. We have the ability to read from that in our file. So if I just bring that down, there's our object. It's our same object that we had there with all our properties. So, and when you go further and start working with APIs and stuff, APIs are going to come back with data that's going to be pretty much exactly structured like this. And you'll be able to then use either JavaScript or React or some JavaScript library to lay out this information on the DOM. So that's pretty cool. So really, we're modeling stuff that we're going to see throughout the entire span of our careers, and it's cool. And you'll like it. Definitely, it's fun. So let's go ahead and try to use it, right? So which way should we go first? Well, let's start by laying out the title, things like that, and the nav, right? We'll just work our way down. So um, for now, what I'll do is we have this nav property, right? Let me show you how we can access these, okay? And the way we can do it is this. I'm gonna let me close these up. We'll work one at a time. Cool, so now we only have this part here. And the way that we do this, and I'm gonna try something here. Well, let me open up two files so that you can see. And then this I want to open up down to the side. And that can go here. Let's bring this down here. And cool. And the reason I do this is because I want to close that part up there. And okay, so that way we can kind of like not scroll up and down a lot to see both parts of the code. So this is the part of the object that we're looking at for now, and then this I can write the code below it, and then that'll make it a little bit easier to keep everything in screen. And then I can also close for now. I don't need to do that. Okay, cool. And then this should also be word wrapped. Cool. All right, so that way now that should be a little bit better to deal with. All right, so um, let me show you how we can access these properties, right? So with the site content, um, the way this works is we can access now all of the, right? We saw with the console logging, the site content will get this entire return, right? So hover over that, and then you get back this object, right? So if I console log, we'll just console log everything so we can watch it. And I'll label it. So my label will be site content. So this will be so we could keep track of it now. So it'll label it for me so I know what's what. And if I console log that, I get back that. Cool. I'm gonna do something quick just to make this even better in one browser so that we can not bounce back and forth. So one sec. This part you don't have to worry about, but you'll see in a sec why it'll be cool. All right, so we'll do that. Hit play here. I'm going to minimize this. And now the only reason I did this is because now look, I have this extension in VSC that so we don't have to bounce back and forth. This window over here is, if you've taken notice, the console. So this here that we're using in the browser is this window. So this just keeps it in VSC. Okay, so as of now, this makes it easier and puts it all in one place. Okay, so we have our code, we have our console browser, and we'll be able to check in console.log these every step of the way. Okay, cool. So let me clear it to get us some room. And let's continue. So now, in order to access the nav properties, the notation or syntax is as follows. So I'm going to console log it just so we can see it in the console. And we're going to use our site content, which is going to call the whole structure. And there are two ways that you can call on these. Um, and they each have their restrictions. Usually, the first one I'm about to show you is pretty much 99% of the way to do it, and it is preferred, and it's the dot method. So if I call a dot on a variable, it's going to, and I give it the name of the key, it's going to produce whatever value. So I'm going to say, okay, open the dictionary with site content and look up the word nav and see what nav equals. And when I do, you could see that here, and they should probably let me label this so we can keep our console.logs settled. So my nav here is now an object of all of those items. So if you look, nav is the definition and the key and the term, and the definition is this object of items, right? So we get back that object of items. So one way is to look up the key by calling the key on its main variable. So we can access that whole list by doing that, right? So if we do that, we get all those items in the nav. Let's say we wanted to get each of these individually, right? Or at least one of them. So this is going to also indicate another way we can do this. And there are moments where the dot method doesn't work. And it's usually in cases where you have a variable, or if you have a string, it's something that JavaScript is not going to know how to deal with. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and try to use the dot method for nav. And now you can chain them, right? So if you want to get the next level down, I could do nav item one. And when I try and do this, JavaScript is going to probably have a heart attack. Yeah, see, it's the dashes. It wants to think their operations, the subtraction. So that's just a character that isn't going to fly in using it in this sense as a variable. So if you ever run into that issue, there is a second way, and you could do it this way. I'm going to show you. You could do it with every dot. You could replace every dot with it. But the dot methods is just usually preferred 99% of the time, um, that it does work. And the occasional time when you run into an issue where you have dashes or something odd that JavaScript can't recognize, you use what's called bracket notation. And it looks just like this. Instead of calling a dot nav item one, I pull a pair of brackets and I feed in that key in quotes. Okay. And now I'm able to pull up that item. So nav item one. Okay. And let me comment these two out just for clarity and clear the console and do it again. And you see nav item one is equal to services. So that would be just now the key value services. So you could see that as we work down, right? It's kind of like the HTML nesting, right? So we're able to start at an upper level and we can access the next level down, the parent, and then we're able to access each one of these individually. Okay. So that is one way we can work with this data. Let's go ahead and just plot some stuff out with it. Now let's use it to manipulate the DOM. So there are many ways that we could go about this, and as you learn more JavaScript, you can definitely be more concise, but let's take it one step at a time. And on my HTML structure, right, it looks like I have this div container with a header and a nav, and these navs have to get populated by these six, and then an image, which we're going to have to put an SRC in. So this whole set of nav items literally is going to go, all right, so we got our nav, we need to get these six here, right? And then we need to get essentially this SRC there. All right, so let's kind of work with that. And the first thing we're going to do is just like we did in the beginning is we're going to have to select the div, the container, right? So let us, and let me, don't want that green is distracting, I think. So let me see. Yeah, I have some weird setting on it, but whatever, we'll go with that. It's the scheme, I apologize. So anyway, with this comment, we want to grab the div with the class container, right? And then and now let's think, do we actually, maybe, do we need to even start that high, right? We may not actually need to do that because we do have a header, right? And we have a nav. So the question then becomes, we probably should grab the nav, right? And then we can maybe grab each one of these items, because the thing is now is that we don't have to create them. These elements already exist. We just have to access them, but we can't change. The goal here is we're not allowed to add classes or anything like that. So we're going to have to use what we got. Well, let's think. We could maybe grab that nav by ID, by tag name, and then maybe go through its children, right? We could maybe do that. That might be good. Let's see. Let's see, because maybe we could grab all six of them and then work with them that way. So that's one way we can do it. We can grab all the A tags, right, and get a list of them. That might work. The problem with this one is that without being able to go through and add classes, right, or IDs, we're going to have to use one of those structures that I was alluding to before. So at this point, in order to grab all those A references, those nav items, we're probably going to have to grab them using and getting a node list. So I guess what we can do is we can either do one of two things. We can query select all of them, right? And we can grab them by, and this is the best thing about the query selector is that I can just put in, if I do this, it's a tag, right? And if I did this, it's a class, and this is an ID. There we go. And you could also do stuff like this. Any CSS is valid in here, selector-wise. So I could even go div.container header nav a. That's highly specific. Not a bad thing, but I mean, we don't need to go that specific for this because, as I'm pretty sure, that should be the only a tags that we got going on. So yeah, so I mean, you could. It's never hurts to be more specific, but you can do any CSS in there. So we can select them by a tag, and we could also do a element by tag name. But we'll stick. I like the query selector is a wild card. You could use it less to memorize, and you could use it with a lot of things. So we'll say constant, and we'll call these nav items is equal to, and see, gotta careful that slash. JavaScript does not like that in its variables, so we tend to use what's called camel case, where the first letter of the first word is lowercase, and then every other word has an uppercase letter for the first letter. So we'll call these nav items, and we'll set that equal to. And let's pull our document. We'll query selector all of them, and we'll grab them by the tag name A. Okay, and let's see what we get. We'll console.log nav items, and we get a node list. Now this is odd. When I don't know why they just didn't use arrays, but I'm sure there's a reason. But you get when you have multiple um, tag names or classes that fit on a query selector all, um, you get a list of them back called a node list. And this is a little different, but you could kind of see that the same object structure is there. The only difference now is in this list, an array in JavaScript is like an object, but the key terms are numbers. So instead of doing something like this, where you have keys of names and these values, an array is just a special type of object, which we use brackets to symbolize. And when I list things like this, if I say A, B, C, this really technically translates to something like this: 0, A, 1, B, 2, C. Now, you'll never see an array written like this, but in theory, it behaves just like we have an object. That the only difference is we don't have to write these keys because they're understood based on this array structure. So when you see it in brackets like this in JavaScript, the first one has what we call an index of 0, and that's technically its key. The second item has an index of 1, so it starts at 0 is the only issue with that. But it's just a special object where we don't write these numbers because they're understood when they're in this form. So they're indexed, and the keys just happen to be these numbers starting at 0. And you can access things on this pretty much the same way. The notation works this way. So if I wanted to access A, right? Let's say this is called constant x. If I wanted to access A, the notation is you use brackets and you use the number. So if I want to get A, it's 0. If I want to get B, it's 1. If I want to get C, it's 2. Okay, so it's just a special object called an array in JavaScript and how that works. Now, a node list is a little bit different, only in the sense of this. It behaves like that kind of array. It just doesn't have as many methods to use on it. You can't do as much with it, but you can still access it the same way. So if I were to say console.log nav items 0, I should get back just my first nav item. And if I clear that for brevity's sake and rerun that, see now instead of the entire list, I'm getting just the first one in that list, which is now all of this is just all the DOM information, but we can take a look at it. This is that first a link. And if we just take a look at kind of the things on here, we have a lot of method, right? So outer HTML is there, there's our HTML. It gives us, various aspects of the children. In this case, you could see where it kind of rooted from. There's a lot of stuff on here that we'll never use. It gives us the inner HTML, right? Notice how it kind of is also referencing, now this is into the parent. So you have parent information about the element itself, its children. So this is really the DOM and all of its methods. And we're able to get that just for one, right? We know the tag names, nav. So there's some, if you have time to kind of peruse through this, of course, but I mean, obviously you could, there's a lifetime here, but you'll start to see some common things that we'll use. But this is a good place to check for like various, all the methods and things, event listeners, which we'll get to next week and stuff like that. Cool. So let's see now if we can kind of use that information, and you know what? We'll see if we can lay out each one of these nav titles, right? Because if I can access each one, right, I can say, all right, cool. So let's see. My first one would be, we'll call that nav item one. And that's going to be, okay, so I got my query selector all. So that should be nav items 0, right? And we can console log it, but for this one, we should be fine. I mean, I mean, practice. I mean, this is what I do anyway. Even if I'm sure of it, I always test myself just because you never know. And yep, so that's good. That gives us our nav item 1. It's indices 0 just because of the way that works, starting at indices 0. So now we have that nav item 1, right? We could go ahead and work with it, right? So what do we want to put on that? Well, let's see. We got it from the DOM, right? And let me make this a bit more specific here. But no, that'll work. Nav item 1, or we could call it A1 actually, so that we don't get it confused with the a tag 1. Okay, so we'll do that just because then what I want to do is I want to access this object and I want to say, okay, just like we did up here, I want to say, all right, well, constant nav item 1. So that's why we'll name it that way just to keep it consistent. So A1 is here, nav item 1 is there. And we'll go ahead and access that. So we have site content .nav we can use, or if you want, because nav, it doesn't have any weird characters in it, you could still do that. You can also do this, it'll work fine. And you could chain on this. This we would have to use this notation for because of the disallowed characters. And we can save that and console log it. And if we have that, we should be able to append. Services, perfect. So now we have this services, we have this tag, we just need to put them together. And we could go one of two ways here, right? It is text content. So I guess in theory, we could say, all right, A1, right? Let's go ahead and give you text content and give you the text content that we just pulled out of item 1, which should be services. And hopefully, if I pull up this in the browser, now we should see, fingers crossed, there we go. Services have been laid out. And for now, I mean, these logos are coming from just broken images that we'll lay out. We'll do the image next. But there you go. So now we were able to lay that out, right? So we were able to access it from that given data. We were able to then use the DOM methods to grab that and then append that in. And now I'm going to switch over to that because now we're going to see some visual stuff. So now we could kind of go through and say, all right, I could lay out each one of these nav items, right? And A items. So, in theory, I could do this, right? I'm gonna just do the property of multiplicity here. And then what I'll do is I'll just say, okay, yeah, we can do that. Five, four, three, two, one, right? And then correspondingly pull one, two, three, four, five for each one of those. And then I could do the same kind of thing down here, right? I could say, all right, let me get my nav items and we'll do one, two, three, four. Let's stop at five for now because the picture is going to be different. And I can say nav and change to three, four, and five. So once I do that, I should be able to set my text content, right? And just change. So I'm gonna, let's see if I can be fancy here. Use multiple and then do, no, because that's not, that won't work. Because then I'm gonna do two. Yeah, no, my bad. Oh well. I mean, I guess I could go this way. I could say, okay, five, four. Yeah, that's what I want to do. Two. Okay. So now let's hope, fingers crossed, I should see what? Wait, did that feed go down? Hold on, let me check to see if the screen is still sharing. Did that go down? Let me check here. Do a refresh. My bad. Okay, I'm back up. Sorry about that. For some reason that looked like it went down on my end. Okay, cool. My apologies. Now we're okay. That looks better. Wait, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. All right, now we're good. Okay. So, um, fingers crossed, I go ahead and save this, and we should see a navbar pillar. Ooh, did I redefine something somewhere? Yep, I did. Look, I didn't change my nav items. My bad. So I'm gonna have to go back and that's a good rule, by the way. The console, like I don't know why as developers we never read errors, but you gotta just gotta read those errors. And look, there we go. As soon as the lag catches up, we have a nav bar. How cool is that? So again, these are going to be linked probably to, yeah, just hashtags, but we were able to lay out those features. Now, here's a lesson in what we call dry or do not repeat yourself, right? I mean, that copy and paste was even a little arduous, right? Because you had to go through and I mean, it's not the worst thing, but I mean, if like there are moments around here where okay, if I'm going to get a lot of code for this, and that's fine to start. A way to think about it as you start to learn a little bit more JavaScript too, like what kind of things you could do, or what patterns do you see to clean this up? And this is going to be a very big technique when e- everywhere as you go forward with this is you want to see is there reusability somewhere. Like this is a big theme of React, and it's going to be, I mean, as we go further we kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to make all this HTML if I'm using the same header and footer on each page. And then we eventually got to the point where okay, we're not even going to have multiple pages, we're going to do it all in one. And then you get these components, right? So like I kind of start to see this pattern of these nav items, right? If I can like, okay, if I could find a method that would maybe increment this number here and also have something that would increment this number here accordingly, I can maybe do this in less work, right? And then I can kind of do the same approach down here, and then maybe I could turn all this into a function. And this is where like at first JavaScript seems weird, and you can see kind of how I like hesitate sometimes when I do this part of the curriculum because um, I wa- it's hard to not put this in a function because it's global scope. It just it's funny how you start to like. There's a lot of like sensey like when you're learning this stuff. It's like you're told what is like you see what's not right and you might not know why. And for there's something still I'm learning why, and that's okay. But you just know that you don't or that you shouldn't, but you might not know why, right? And like this is one of those things where now like I do know why and sometimes it's a hindrance when you try to build up to it because it's a lot at first. But like this is something that I would probably want to maybe write a function that would help me generate this. And the best part about it is that if I do, it becomes that's kind of what a React component would is going to be, is and that's why people love it because what it does is it's going to turn this into a function that makes it. Like you won't have to write all this. You're going to have ways to do this so easily. Um, and just kind of as a little side note, I can map out the pseudocode, but like imagine if I had like a function here that was something like let's see, make nav maker, right? And if I were able to now, feed in these values for these nav items, maybe I could like build out this system with and truncate the code, right? So I'm going to look for like kind of like similarities here. So it looks like one thing that's the same is my nav items, right? So like my nav items here, and let me get rid of 6 for now because we didn't do the picture yet. But my nav items here correspond to essentially, in a sense, these terms, right? So there's some similarity here where um, as the nav item value that I'm going to search here increases by 1, my A's increase, right? The only issue is this over here. So we could go one of two ways, right? We can set up two different ways to kind of handle those numbers, or I mean, these these I can change, these I can change, but I name these, so I get to pick that part. I mean, I could stick with the one because it's the first, right? Or I can just kind of do this, right? Now this is kind of maybe a cop out, but not really. I mean, I get to name those, right? So I could choose to name them with reference to the DOM, or I can this. And you know what? Because of that vagueness, I'm going to say, and because maybe another developer would like to know what I did, I'm just going to leave a comment and say, A variables were named to follow and respect the corresponding orders of the or corresponding indices of the nav item node list. So I'll leave a comment. Okay, and that's gonna help me. So and anyone else, because guess what? The comments are for other developers, of course, to work with your stuff, but really they're for future you. Because I'll look at this tomorrow and go, okay, what was I thinking? Well, okay, yeah. So I could have numbered these. I have the choice, so I'm gonna make it easy. And it's not really a harder solution if you do it the other way. It's just you have to subtract one when you do the loop. But still, let's not set ourselves up for too much. So, but I mean, either way, that's up to, I mean, I've done it both ways, honestly. So that's kind of the approach there. Neither one is right or wrong, but hey, guess what? What is right is I now have an indication of why I did that. So whenever you get the vague portions of your code, the comments are the best. Cool. So now we got some niceness here. As A increases from 0 to 4, we also have the indices, right? We also have this working off. Okay, so that's cool. It looks like we're calling all of these data points out of this object. So that's some similarity, right? And this is kind of how we go through and we look for what's the same kind of concept here. All right, so there are some points of similarity, right? So let's see if we can combine it. So for this function, let's see. Um, I want to essentially, right, take the text content and I can think about two things like what am I going to take in and what am I going to return. And I'll start with what I'm going to return, right? I basically want to return the text content. So my a tag and my text content, and I'm going to set that equal to a nav item. The only difference here is what's going to change. Well, this number, so we'll just call this I for now, or N, or whatever, number for now, not ID. So we'll just say number, right? And that number is going to be the same as what? This. So if I have A1, I want to add my text to it with the text content method. And I want to set that equal to nav item and the same number, right? So whatever variable I pick would represent both of those. All right, so we have that part. How are we going to get to that? Well, let's see. We're going to have to come up with a way to name these constants, right? So I could, let's see. Well, I could be generic, and now I definitely want to declare them, right? So I can say, all right, maybe do some constant and say, all right, well, I'd have a and a number, right? So I'm going to have to go ahead and loop that out. But let's see if I can maybe do so without, some merging here, without maybe defining them, right? Because if I can use a structure and maybe just loop that out, then I won't have to worry about defining them because they'll be defined as part of that loop. So that's cool, and that actually works because we have some like crossover, right? So like I wouldn't have to define this 5 times because I'm going to use it the same. So um, let's try that, and I'm just going to try a loop, right? And I'm going to say, and if this is different or unfamiliar, and I know we're a little bit above time, so I'll wrap up, but you can stay, or it's up to you. You can watch later, but I'm going to try this. I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to loop through, and a for loop will do this, and you basically use this to say 3 things. You'll say, all right, I'm going to define a value, and this is going to be my value that is going to reference in the loop. It's going to be a number, and we're going to say let I, and we're going to start it off at 0, right? And we're going to let this represent this. So I'm going to change this number now. This is why I said I to begin with. This is going to be our I value. It's just going to be a number, an integer. Let's say, let's start it at 0, and I want to go all the way up to equals 5. So I want to make sure that I does not get bigger than 5. So I is going to be less than or equal to 5. This means we're going to start at 0. We're going to run each number in a loop. So we'll take I, and on the first loop, I is going to be 0. We'll plug in 0. We'll get a value. Then we're going to repeat it, and we're going to do 1, 2, and all the way up to 5. So the starting condition tells you what number to start your loop at. The middle condition says where to end it. So we'll say less than or equal to 5 is where I want to stop, keep going until you get to 5. And then I'm going to say I plus plus, which is the shorthand for I equals I plus 1. Or another way to write it is I plus equals 1. Or I plus plus. They all mean take the value of I and add 1 to it. So start at 0, and we'll make a block here. Start at 0 and run this function. So I'm going to put whatever code I put here is going to run first where I is 0. Then it's going to run again with I is 1. And all the way going one at a time until the endpoint, which is 5. So essentially, a loop does repeating code for a number of times, and you give it a start, an ending, and how you want it to jump. So start at 0, go up to 5, and run this code for every plus 1 integer from 0 to 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that should give us 0. Oh, see, now look, now I'm 1 off, right? Technically, I'm pulling in this number here, right? And I want this to be 0 through 4, so I probably should renumber, right? Ooh, so now we ran into a problem, right? I can't change that. So we will have to do a little bit of math. So see, again, I tried to be a little clever there and I felt it. I should have said what I was thinking. We're probably going to end up in the gutter anyway. But hey, you know what? We can handle that, right? Because our nav item is going to be different by I how, right? So if I is 0, we want our nav item to be 1, right? If I is 1, we want it to be 2. So we could probably add in the number 1 to readjust that, which I could have done as well here, um, as well. But, again, there I am trying to be shady and it bit me. So technically then we got to pay for it, right? We got to own our mistakes if it really was one, but if it is, we'll own it, right? And we'll work with it. So no going back now. And what we'll do is we'll say, okay, yeah, we'll just increase that by 1, right? So let's give that a shot. So now that I have that, my other variables are defined, right? Because I can say, all right, so we have our a tag, right? So outside of here, I could say, all right, so I have my node list, right? I'm going to need that. So that's my constant. In this case, we'll say, what would we call this? Let's see. I guess we could just use site content. We'll do site content.nav because I want to pull all the a links from it. So let me think. Let's try something here. I know in here I want to do a return of something like this. So a, and we're going to do now I, right? So that would be um, a 0, right? Something like that. Um, we could probably let me think. Let me think of the best way to do this. So if I pull the a value from the node list, right? So if I have my node list is going to be something like the query selector all, right? This here nav items. So let me comment this out quick. And let me pull in my list, right? Because I want to use that. That's going to be my key here. So my nav items, and I'll pull them in. Document.query, same thing. They're all hey, cool. So now I have my list, right? And I'm going to want to loop through that list. And in that list, I'm going to have each one of these values come up, right? So my A tags. And when I have A0, I'm going to get this one, right? So if I were to take that value, right, in my nav items, I would have my nav items, right? And if I pulled I here, right, when I is 0, I would get this tag. When I was 1, I would get that tag, right? So if I take that and I set that equal to, right, so my nav items, and I do a text content on them, right, following down here. So here my A is just my nav items, right, because I call it here. I mean, if you could even just call that A, right? Either way, that's going to give me all those A tags or nav items and my text content. I'm going to set that equal to now. Now I got to pull in that nav item, right? So I can do that by saying, okay, I have my object, which is site content. I have my nav, right? And I have my nav item. And now then I want to do that number plus 1. So I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to be a little tricky and use ES6 notation and use a string literal. So I'm going to use backticks item and then do this. I plus 1. And I hope that ES6 will work here. It should. But what I'm doing essentially is I am using string interpolation to pull in essentially that item. Now, if I didn't do that, I'd have to probably say nav item. I guess this will work. And if it doesn't, then we'll fall back. Nav item, I'd have to do the string nav item and then dash. And then I'd have to do something like this, I guess, plus concatenate the variable I and then close it off. So then that way, that would be nav item and then plus whatever I, and then I'd want to do plus one here would be. I could technically throw it in parentheses just to be picky, but I don't think I'd have to. I think it'd be fine. So now I'll go ahead and save this, and it won't do anything because I'm not invoking this function. So I could do one of two things. I could pull the loop out, or I could just invoke the function and see, pray that works. And boom, there it is. And yeah, oh yeah, we can definitely do. If we're going to talk about destructuring, absolutely. I want you to. There are so many ways to go about this that whatever techniques you use that you're learning, by all means, absolutely. So you can have fun with that. We could pull out, like Mauricio's asking a question about pulling using a technique called destructuring. So for instance, like I love that. You can get access to all of these values individually on the first line by doing something like A0, A1, A2, A3, so on. And that would give you access to essentially um, each individual item, as you can see. So A0 would be that first one. Yeah, you could definitely do that. That's a great way if you're familiar with that. If not, you'll learn it. So good call on that. Oh, there's so much fun you could have here. I'll keep us here all night. No, I won't. I'll be wrapping up shortly. But oh yeah, I'll tell you. Let me tell you my advice. Um, Nothing. This is how you know if something you're doing is wrong. I guess from what people tell you. Um, if your code does the same thing as mine, it is readable, it is not hindering performance, and it is, and uh, causing the same end to the means, then how could, after that, what's wrong? It's really subjective and preference, right? The goal is to write code that is first readable, readable for humans. It's performant. It doesn't hit performance time. And of course, you want to use best practices, and that all fits into that picture. But I mean, if we're achieving the same DOM thing and you're writing out the separate ones, and I'm doing a loop and the runtime's still the same, the page still loads the same, and we can read it, and another developer can, then the rest is opinion about code. So that's really what I think, and a lot of developers think. Of course, you could always refactor. I could refactor a million ways, right? Because now I'm thinking that maybe I could map over this. Maybe I could. Another cool thing you could do is use something like spread and rest operators, are really neat. And even something as simple as this. If I don't want to invoke that function, there's this thing called a IFI, an instantly invoked function expression. I can now not call the function if I wrap it in an IFI, and now it should still run. Well, actually, it should, but the problem is I don't want to name it. My bad. It's a function expression, so I should take that out. And I think it's my syntax. Yeah, the C. My bad. It's the VSC gets very mad about this. So let me do this right. So then you do your function, and then you want. I think it wants me to do that. I think instead. What's it saying? Say, oh, you know what I did? Here's another thing. This is a great. Look, oh, this is. I love this stuff. This also does something very big. Look what it did. It changed my site content so it was not defined. Ifs will seal this. It's a scope thing. It doesn't know the definition now, because if this also protects functions. In fact, all of your third-party scripts, you'll see tons of these, because now guess what? When you pull in a script from a third-party vendor, what if they have variables named what you do? And the scripts are all run at once. They pile them up and run them one after a time in the compiler, and it becomes one big global space. So what if you named something like that they did, and now you're going to have to look through thousands of lines of their vendor code and not use that name? So this kind of like sections off that, and it's cool. It gives its own scope, which we'll talk about later. So the question is that in this case, maybe an IFI isn't the best choice. So what would I do to handle that? I would either have to pull that definition in, right? Or I can just do this and say, okay, you know what? Come on into scope with me. Let's pull that in. And I think that it's an extra. Yeah, that looks like that could be extra. Let me get rid of this for now. Do that. And let me just pull in this constant really quick. And I'll do there. We'll put it down here. Yeah, it's going to look messy at first. We'll close off that iffy. And now let's try it. Ooh, unexpected token. That just means I have a token out of whack somewhere. There it is. And there we go. So now I don't even have to invoke it. I just end up using an iffy, which actually will immediately evoke it. But notice it came with a little bit of another issue. So that's another thing too. You want to learn, experiment, but just remember that when you try to fix something, you might something else might occur, and I guess that's fun for me, and I think everyone would agree. But that would be my advice. Is two of my big things for learning development are this: a experiment. Don't be afraid to get in the console log it, play around with stuff, use what you know, do the extra research, and talk to me about it. You're more than welcome to. Every day I try and say hello. You are more than welcome to ask me anything. That's what I'm here for, in addition to the usual scheduled stuff. Secondly, if you really want to propel yourself, um, you watch someone do it yourself, and then show someone how to do it. And that has been a great catalyst to moving quickly and really helping me solidify and understand. And guess what? I'm going to make mistakes. We all do, and that's human. And that's how teams work. The teams that I work on, the best in. I want to work on a team that is forgiving, and it's okay to make mistakes, and we encourage it. And don't ever be ashamed to do that because that's how you learn. So cool. Lots of cool stuff tonight. I know it was a lot. Feel free to ask questions. Review this. I might thinking now I got finally a good microphone, and I want to put together a little bit more about this topic because a lot came out in that. So, um, if you want to, I can get the GitHub repo together. Maybe you could practice if you want to lay this out and keep practicing with that as another project, or even if you want to start simpler, right? But make an object of an H1 paragraph and a picture, and try to lay it out. Make some of your own examples. But on that note, I have kept you well past the time. We will go ahead and conclude for this evening. And if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. And hey, happy coding, right? Thank you again, and we will chat soon.